Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, the first part thereof for the 2nd of March 2025. Goodness me, March. And I am a little late to it today because I've been watching the news. So much is going on at the moment, like watching the mainstream news, just sitting on my bed, looking at my sources, but also keeping an eye out for what's going on in London. It's an incredible day potentially today, as European leaders meet and Keir Starmer attempts to build a bridge between Europe and the US, and indeed Zelensky and Trump. There's all that going on. Whilst I'm also nursing not a sore head actually, just had a pub quiz. Always a bridesmaid, never the bride. Became third again last night. The village hall, big old village hall it is. A lot of teams there. Third, and if Dave had done what I said with the Joker, if we played the Joker when I said, we would have come second. Anyway, that's all irrelevant. I did fall over outside afterwards. My walking was not good yesterday and my knee is banged up. Anyway, that's all irrelevant. I'm just giving you some extra context to this video because there's almost nothing to talk about in terms of the bandwidth being totally strangled by everything going on around the war in Ukraine, with very little news coming from the war in Ukraine. If we go to the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply to this, and we are seeing, you can see those caveats in the description to the video below, we are seeing a trend that we've seen quite a bit over the last week or two. Fairly high personnel losses, but at the low end of the high range, just around about the daily average of tanks lost, just a snip below. Troop carrying AFVs actually tipped above the daily average, up to 25, maybe significant there. 51 artillery systems, so yet again a lot of artillery taken out. Good news in 2 MLRS multiple launch rocket systems being lost, and 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems. That is good news. I can't wait for the Andrew Perpetual loss list to come out. That could well come out in a flurry this weekend. It's got a backlog of almost 3 weeks or something. 117 vehicles and fuel tanks is pretty high. 5 pieces of special equipment, and a massive number in the drone category there of 192, and it just goes to show what's been taking place on consecutive nights, or consistently really every night in Ukraine, as the Russians send inordinate amounts of Shahed drones there. But fairly challenging loss list for the Russians right across the board there. They're losing a lot of materiel. They're losing a lot of personnel still. Not the highest numbers of personnel, but still significant. And we are seeing some anti-aircraft warfare system and artillery losses that I think are pretty substantial as well, and that's somewhat consistent too, particularly in artillery systems as of late. Now we are seeing more and more of this kind of setup. This is a corridor, obviously a supply corridor. In this case, it's a Russian one between Bakhmut and Chasiv Yar. And look at the nets; they have done an absolutely amazing job of covering this entire supply corridor with netting. And actually, I'd imagine that is doing a fairly good job of protecting these vehicles. Honestly, you know, that is a good bit of innovation there. I mean, it's pretty simple innovation. Clearly, you should be able to drive or fly your drones in one end and fly down there and take out vehicles. But if you just then station really good electronic warfare at each end of this corridor, then that's a pretty good way of dealing with the threat of drones. So interesting to see that. Not just, you know, we've seen this before, but actually this is the longest passage of netting that I have seen. Patriots say they've infiltrated a military unit in Moscow region and burned down a bus. Atesh published a video and a few photos of the sabotage operation, after which they said panic broke out in the military unit and commanders tried to cover up the incident. So that has happened. And that's really all. Very little to talk about in that segment, as well as in the strike segment. So although, yes, another night of heavy drone activity, although actually, even though the figures for the hits and losses are massive here, Remember, it kind of gets cut off somewhat through last night, and so we'll actually go to the night before, and the night before is almost certainly where most of those drones were tallied. So last night, actually 79 drones were fired, 63 were shot down, so a much larger proportion actually shot down last night. 16 were brought down by electronic warfare or were decoys, and that gives you 79, so that's 100% interception rate. Drone damaging Kharkiv, Sumy, Khmelnytskyi and Zaporizhzhia. You can see some of that here. For example, Khmelnytskyi, a 75-year-old woman was injured when her house was damaged. 9 others affected by blasts from fallen debris. Nikopol is still continuing to get... Nikopol's on the northern shore of the Zaporizhzhia reservoir that's largely been drained. It gets hammered by shelling, basically just bog standard shelling all the time, Nikopol, and Mahanets, which is just down the road there. So Kramatorsk. So quite a lot of damage still being done, but no direct hits from the drones, if the Ukrainians are to be believed with their general staff figures. Zaporizhzhia, though, horrible scenes as a drone did hit a 2-story house in the city. No injuries reported, but that is what happens when an explosive munition goes up in the air and then is either shot down or brought down by electronic warfare and lands in an urban area. And then we heard that yesterday ballistic missile hit Odesa, 2 people injured. No further details released, so that could well have hit a military target. I don't know. You often see just these clouds in a picture that gives you no indication of where this happened, because it's illegal to show geolocatable evidence of strikes. And yeah, so you get pictures like that. So I don't know what was hit. Okay, now we're going to move on to other bits and pieces already. Just a little bit about the front line. The Ukrainians are actually doing some serious counterattacking in Toretsk here. Ukrainian armed forces are actively advancing in Toretsk, reclaiming key positions. Fighting continues in the city centre, and the enemy is losing control. So the Russians are losing control. There are reports of complete encirclement of Russian occupiers in several areas, which is what I was talking about. I was saying that this area here could get cut off just over across there, but also here too. Just a lot of counterattacking, reclaiming territory on multiple parts of this sector. So that's good news to the Ukrainians there. Of course, in other places they are under a lot of pressure themselves, but I just thought I'd share that one with you. Interesting news coming here from the analyst saying Israel is lobbying the US for Russian bases in Syria. Israel is trying to persuade the US to persuade the new Syrian government to let the Russians have their bases back. Why? Because it's afraid Turkish influence in Syria is growing too strongly, and it's upsetting Israel's view of security. So Israel is still actually going through with some bombing campaigns into Syria. And then we also hear from that Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli leader, has sent his military secretary to Russia. He will hold a series of meetings in Moscow on security issues and strengthening cooperation. Israeli authorities are trying to study their relations with Russia. I don't know if you can join these two things together there, but that's certainly worrying. And of course, Israel had their arms twisted. Apparently, there's quite a lot of coercion, pleading, I don't know, to get Israel to back the US in not signing up to the UN resolution on the war in Ukraine. So it was US was surrounded by a hive of scum and villainy in terms of North Korea and Russia and all these other nations that you're used to seeing voting in the same way. And then the US added themselves to that. And then Israel. And people were wondering what was going on there. Then we hear that there's quite a lot of persuasion coming from the US to Israel to do exactly that. And now we're seeing Israel acting in ways that seem counterproductive, certainly to Ukraine. Another tale of woe from Russia's aviation industry. I don't always report these because they are so common, but Red Wings Airline had a mechanical fault and couldn't fly from Tbilisi to Moscow. They did get another plane, but it was much smaller. 50 ticket holders were kicked off with no compensation and told they could fly from another city. Yeah, just like that. And I meant to have this one in. I didn't have it. This is supposed to be in the other section. So Russia, hashtag Russia on fire. Huge blaze in Moscow again, in the Moscow region. The roof of a plastics warehouse in the village of Bolshoye Bunkovo collapsed. Officials say the fire reached 10,000 square meters, but is now under control. Gas cylinders in the building also reportedly exploded during the blaze. That is a massive blaze in Moscow again, and this happens all too often. Although it's all good news for Ukraine, it's kind of weakening the Russian economy, making people on edge, especially if you can connect this directly to the war in Ukraine. Okay, now this one is doing the rounds. One of Norway's largest fuel companies, Hultbach Bunkers, has refused to refuel US Navy ships due to Trump's scandalous behavior at yesterday's meeting with Zelensky. Quote, "This is betrayal," they declared. As a result, the Virginia submarine returned without fuel. This is important, right? You might start seeing a division between Europe and the US to the point where this is happening. We have today been witnesses, say, Hultbach Bunkers, to the biggest shit show ever presented. I mean, this is their official like tweet here, live on TV by the current American president and his vice president. Huge credit to the president of Ukraine restraining himself and for keeping calm, even though USA put on a backstabbing TV show. It made us sick, short and sweet. As a result, we have decided to immediately stop as a fuel provider to American forces in Norway and their ships calling Norwegian ports. No fuel to Americans. We encourage all Norwegians and Europeans to follow our example. Slava Ukraini, or Slava Ukraina, they say there. This is absolutely incredible. Norwegian fuel supplier halts sales to US Navy over Trump-Zelensky dispute, citing moral compass. So obviously they've come out with further statements as well. Norwegian fuel supplier Hultbach Bunkers will not deliver a, quote, single litre of fuel to the US Navy until US President Donald Trump, quote, is gone. The company's owner told media outlet Kirsten's Norringsliv on March 1st after Trump's highly public dispute with Zelensky. And then you have today Elon Musk saying or agreeing with Gunter Eagleman, as another wingnut person on Twitter. But anyway, that Elon Musk loves to retweet. Huge reach these people have. Saying we should pull out of the UN and NATO. So there is now Mike Lee, senator from Ohio, or is it Utah? It's Utah. Has also said that the US should pull out of NATO. So this is a really big thing. And when you're getting Norway, a NATO country here, not fueling like a nuclear submarine, this is massive. So the USS Delaware, Virginia-class nuclear attack submarine, found itself stranded off Norway's coast after one of the country's largest marine fuel suppliers refused to refuel it. This move is not just a business decision, it's a political statement. In an official post, HB condemned Trump's recent actions as backstabbing TV show, praised Zelensky, and declared no fuel to Americans, while urging other European suppliers to follow suit. The timing, impeccable. This comes right after the contentious Trump-Zelensky meeting, where Vance accused Zelensky of leading a propaganda tours to highlight Russian invasion destruction, provoking a heated exchange and creating a public spectacle. Coincidence? Or are we witnessing the US influence being whittled away while adversaries take notes? And we are hearing that there are certain maybe orders into US companies are also struggling. We are ramping up for a trade war between the US and the EU, but also the US and Mexico, and the US and Canada. Canada are then getting closer to Europe. You are seeing people cancel their flights and holidays to the US. There's all sorts of gearing up for these trade wars, and there's been talk as well about how, or possibly there should be talk. There's a caller into LBC the other day saying everyone's talking about military reaction to the war in Ukraine and what's Europe going to do and how they're going to deal with the US. Well, how about some economic action or kind of business action, and talk about hitting Amazon for some, if you want money for your defense industries, then how about properly taxing Amazon? How about properly taxing some of these big US companies that are set up in Europe, hit them for big tax dollars, take windfall taxes off them, and so on and so forth, and then hit the US where it hurts really financially, and then that can be a way of drumming up economic drumming up money for defence spending, etc., etc. So the EU apparently are just getting very prepared for the trade war that's going to happen, and this is not going to be good for Ukraine, of course. But the EU need to obviously feel like they're going to have to stand up. Now, Franz Stefan Gadi says, what can Europe do to help Ukraine militarily if US aid and support were to cease? What should Europe's priorities be? Here are a few quick thoughts this morning after my first cup of tea. Stabilizing the front line in southern Donetsk. So Ukraine can only enter negotiations to avoid a Diktatfrieden with a stable front line. This first priority is stabilizing southern Donetsk. This requires addressing Ukraine's manpower problem and stepping up artillery deliveries if the US supplies cease. Without further US military aid, Ukraine's rate of fire will drop, providing Russia tactical opportunities on the battlefield and reducing the chances of stabilizing the front. Artillery, strike drones and mines are key for compensating for the lack of infantry. 2. Securing long-range air defense interceptors. Europe must negotiate with the US to procure GEM-T and PAC-3 interceptors for long-range air defense. The US produces around 240 GEM-T and 500 PAC-3 interceptors annually. There's already a shortage and additional supplies will take time. Procurement from interceptors could serve as a blueprint for purchasing other needed military hardware by Europeans in the US for Ukraine. 3. Strengthening Ukraine's indigenous capabilities. Europeans should fund projects to improve Ukraine's indigenous intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, long-range strikes, and command and control capabilities. Joint ventures and deeper collaboration between Ukrainian and European partners are vital. That is actually happening. In fact, we hear that NASAMS are going to be making a lot of interceptors in Ukraine. Obviously, you need anti-ballistic missile interceptors too. Side note, even with new military aid package, US inventories of surface-to-surface ballistic missiles and long-range rocket artillery remain low. A Ukrainianization of these capabilities is necessary. I've said that for a long time. Number 4, committing to European rearmament. European governments must signal to their defense sectors that they are serious about rearmament and place multi-year contracts with the defense industry. ESG criteria need a substantial overhaul. Only a strong European defense industry will suffice. This post doesn't address collaborative development, procurement and maintenance of military equipment and serve as a strong partner for Ukraine. Streamlining and expanding training efforts. This includes improving collaboration between UAMAM and NSATU, streamlining training standards and processing across European countries and revisiting the idea of a European-led training mission in Ukraine. 6. Defining clear objectives and risks in Ukraine. Europe must understand its objectives in Ukraine and what it's collectively willing to risk. This must precede any discussion of potential European troop deployments. It's easy to get sucked into a war, but far harder to get out, especially without crystal clear, realistic objectives that align with available resources and acceptable risks. The key question that needs answering is, in this regard, is whether Europe is truly prepared to fight Russia over Ukraine, or with or without US military support. Number 7, the bottom line. Europe cannot match a full breadth of capabilities needed in certain critical categories. Has nothing to offer the Ukrainians off the shelf if the US military aid ceases. However, the situation is far from hopeless. Steps can be taken now to help Ukraine stabilize the front line in 2025. Ukraine must, however, fix its most glaring military challenge, lack of infantry at the front line. No European capability can directly address this, which is nothing we didn't already know, but kind of packages it all into a useful thread. So good stuff there. Right. A little bit on the Russian economy. After the start of negotiations between Russia and the US, so now we've seen Russia get together with the US in Turkey and in Riyadh without Ukraine, which look more like economic trade deals than actually movements that are interested in seeing the sustainable end of the war to bring about a just and lasting peace. No. So after the start of negotiations between Russia and the US, international investors have begun buying all types of assets related to Russia. And despite the fact that hundreds of billions of Russian assets are still frozen by US sanctions, investors are trying to get around them. And that has led to a bounce in the ruble. So the ruble is back now under 90. So the US is doing everything it can to salvage the Russian economy. It's absolutely despicable. Now we are hearing, and this is Putin being very clever. There it is. Putin offers Trump a better rare minerals deal in his country and says Russia has significantly larger rare earth reserves than Ukraine. Wake the F up, MAGA. Trump is a transactional narcissist with a debt to pay and a country to leverage. The deal isn't just about minerals. It's about setting up a scenario where Russia and Trump both win at America's expense. Trump does not care if he weakens the US long term. He just needs it weak enough while he's in control so that no one can stop him from doing whatever he wants. That's their opinion, call to activism. But actually, Putin's been very clever here, saying, I'll open up Russia back to all of your corporations. You come in and we'll do deals on rare earth minerals, exactly what you wanted from Ukraine. And Ukraine, we're going to give you them, and you were going to give peace securities to Ukraine. Well, now you don't need to do that. In other words, you're not going to help Ukraine. And in fact, you can come and help the Russians here by doing deals with us. Meanwhile, in Europe today, Keir Starmer is meeting. He's already met with Zelensky last night. Incredibly important, symbolic meeting there. Zelensky's going to meet with King Charles today. And we've got Ukraine, France, Germany, Spain, Denmark, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Poland, Canada, Finland, Sweden, Czechia, and Romania meeting today. No Baltic nations. They'll discuss strengthening Ukraine with military aid and economic pressure on Russia, need for a lasting deal. Delivers a permanent peace in Ukraine and ensures that Ukraine is able to deter and defend against future Russian attack, and next steps for planning for strong security guarantees. So what the three things that Keir Starmer said this morning on TV is we want a strong Ukraine. In other words, we need to arm Ukraine up and for them to keep fighting if they need to. So this is not peace right now, which is what the US wants. So the UK and these other nations are going to come up with an alternative peace plan. And it requires strong Ukraine, European security guarantees, and a US backstop for the security guarantees. Those are the three main components that they need to sort out today. And obviously the US are going to have to play a part in that. So UK, France, and others are to develop but mainly UK and France, to develop a ceasefire plan to present to the US, with Starmer hosting this meeting. But it's, as I said, it's already been symbolically very interesting. We'll talk about this a lot later, where he warmly hugged Zelensky, had a nice chat with him in the White House, and then walked him out, this long walk out to the motorcade, which is a really symbolic kind of, I'm not kicking you out the White House. I'm going to talk about how the messaging from the UK is subtle, but is understated typically, but actually very strong. Starmer won't diss the US with words, right? Laura Kuenssberg pressured him this morning, and he didn't do it. He didn't diss Trump. But what he's done is very subtly contrasted the US with the UK in a way that the actions or the visuals speak louder than words. Very, very interesting. Now, it's worth just showing you this. Here is something to consider about Europe. So this is a short video to say that actually you add Europe to Ukraine in terms of personnel numbers, in terms of tanks, in terms of all of these aspects of military hardware, fighter aircraft. Actually, Europe is stronger than the US and China and Russia. And you add Ukraine to that, and actually Europe really can stand tall. And, there's talk that Europe wouldn't be able to stand up to Russia. I actually went against that yesterday, speaking to Jonathan Fink, by saying actually Europe would easily be able to destroy Russia in a conventional war at the moment, because the Russian land forces have been decimated. And their air force is under a lot of pressure, whereas Europe, we haven't been decimated. Yeah, we've underfunded it, but if you put all of the European reservists and troops and tanks and infantry fighting vehicles and aircraft together, Europe massively overwhelms Russia. So the point is, we shouldn't just dismiss Europe. It's really easy to say, oh, Europe's rubbish, the US is everything. We need to be a bit careful with that. I'm going to leave you with something positive here. I won't play all of this to you. You should go and watch. Marsh Family came to prominence in lockdown, where everyone's at home, and they got together and they produced these music videos of famous songs, changing the lyrics to them, and they're really, really good. But their last two songs have been massively pro-Ukrainian. And they in like a day and a half, they wrote the lyrics and arranged this song to talk about the White House debacle, and it is absolutely brilliant. You just have to watch it. Let's listen to the beginning of it. This is a Coldplay song. Viva la vida.
You used to rule the world, choosing sides, being undeterred. Now after Putin in secret phones, in a week that world's disowned.
controls the skies. It's not clear who are really allies. Listen as the sirens ring. When diplomacy's dead, nobody wins.
1 minute land of the free. Next assaulting Zelensky as he discovers that he had no chance. Shouted over by Trump and bullied by Vance. To hear it made you spit out your dinner. Oval Office to Jerry Springer. Hero here with broad appeal. Hijacked over a minerals deal. For some reason with such disdain. Said upon there was never an honest word. And that was when they screwed the world.
It was a sick and a vile thing, inviting all the meat. Shouted leader in a second tongue. People couldn't believe what they had done.
How can such a parade? Look at what he's got on his plate. Are they puppets on a Kremlin string? Or why they never badmouth Putin? We hear abuse in the mud they're slinging. 2 men saved by the fire are swinging. Neath the pictures of luminaries, they're twisting friends into adversaries. Now indulging in calling names while appeasing a tyrant's games. Watching the curtain fall when there's a nuclear arsenal. Hear their actions delighted. Putin for surrender can put the Putin. See democracy's brought to heel. Thanks to Vance for his one-touch feel. Zelensky's tribal to make it plain. You know Pearl Harbor could come again. Every hackle stirred. We need your help to save the world.
All dressed in blue and yellow as well. Interesting there. I absolutely love that. I love the lyrics. I love the way they played around with some serious ideas there. And I did play it all because I couldn't not. And also the use of worm tongue. How many times have I said that? Grima worm tongue, that Lord of the Rings reference to the guy that whispers sweet nothings into King Theoden's ears and turns him to the dark side. Just honestly, absolutely brilliant. Their previous song was absolutely brilliant as well, so go and watch that. And also the SNL Cold Open. If you like a bit of comedy, go and watch their version of the White House Zelensky meeting. It is genius. So some things to watch, guys, for today. I'm going to get on and do probably a mammoth geopolitical video. An awful lot to talk about. Anyway, take care, guys. Speak soon.